The steady buzz of machinery was the only sound that cut through the eerie stillness of the Horizon's monitoring station. Carrie Novak, weary after 6 hours of staring at signal data, rubbed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Her posture sagged under the weight of fatigue. The station's overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. It wasn't much different from the blackness that surrounded the ship in this remote stretch of space. Even the soft beeping of the diagnostics systems, though comforting, couldn't shake the sense of isolation that had gripped the crew for the past few weeks. The silence was so profound that the steady hum of the Horizon's engines almost felt intrusive. "Anything yet, Carrie?" Captain Wright's voice crackled through the comms, a familiar tone, yet always tinged with authority. Carrie didn't look up. She'd been trying to make sense of the signal for hours. It wasn't the kind of transmission the ship's sensors were meant to detect. "Not yet, Captain, but I think I've found something," she muttered, narrowing her gaze at the laser plasma display in front of her. The screen flickered as she zoomed in on the data. Her fingers hovered over the interface, tracing the subtle anomalies in the signal's waveform. "I'm seeing a repeating sequence," she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "It's too regular. There's something deliberate about this." "Deliberate?" Captain Wright's voice tightened with curiosity. "Explain." "I'm not sure yet," she replied, toggling between different frequency bands on the display. "But it's mathematical in nature, Captain, not just cosmic noise, something artificial." Her heartbeat quickened as the implications settled in. "I think it's a distress signal." A brief silence followed. Carrie could feel the weight of Captain Wright's gaze through the speaker, though he wasn't in the room. She waited for his decision. "You're certain?" Wright asked after a moment. "Not certain, but the pattern—" She stopped herself before going into technical jargon. "The signal's origin is clear. It's coming from a region we haven't mapped. Sector 7 Alpha." Carrie glanced at the heads-up display that lit up her peripheral vision, marking the approximate location of the source. No outposts, no registered vessels. Only deep, silent space. "Captain," she added, her voice gaining urgency, "there are no recorded vessels in that sector. Whatever's out there, it's been alone for a long time." Wright's answer came immediately, cutting through the quiet of the station like a bolt. "Plot a course to the source, maximum safe speed. I'll take full responsibility." The command was a gamble, one that could put them off course for weeks. The Horizon had a schedule, a mission that didn't account for detours. But there was something compelling in the signal, something that demanded attention. A potential first contact situation, no less. Carrie's pulse quickened, her mind racing with the possibilities, both thrilling and terrifying. As the Horizon's engines shifted into motion, Carrie felt a mix of dread and excitement. This was why she'd joined the Terran Space Initiative. The possibility of discovering new life. Or, as it now seemed, rescuing it from the black void of space. Yet even as she tapped into the ship's navigation system, there was something unsettling about the signal. Something she couldn't shake off. Minutes later, the ship's sensors came to life. On the bridge, a few dozen meters away from the monitoring station, the crew watched intently as the plasma display came to life with readings. Each one more troubling than the last. "We're closing in on it, Captain," Frank Martinez, the chief engineer, reported, his voice calm but taut with a hint of disbelief. He was the one who had pushed the ship's systems to their limits, keeping them on course without breaking their speed limit. "Distance?" Wright's voice remained steady, though the tension in his tone was clear. 3 days, Frank replied, casting a wary glance toward the glowing display of the alien vessel's coordinates. "We'll be close enough to get a visual soon." Carrie returned her attention to the display. The signal hadn't fluctuated once since she'd first picked it up. It was steady, persistent, like a cry for help reverberating through the dark. "I'll keep monitoring," she said, adjusting her seat and focusing her attention on the signals. The next few hours passed in near silence, save for the occasional hum of systems and the mechanical clatter of the crew's steady preparations. Carrie's eyes began to blur from the intense concentration. She kept her gaze locked on the display as it blinked with updates, none of which offered much more than confirmation of the distance closing between them and the mysterious source. When the object finally appeared on the horizon's long-range scanners, it was not what anyone expected. Carrie leaned forward in her chair, eyes wide with disbelief as the object appeared. It wasn't just a floating chunk of debris or an abandoned satellite. No, it was a ship, though nothing like any human design she had ever seen. "Captain," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you need to see this." The comms crackled, and Captain Wright's voice was steady. "On my way." The ship's senior staff filed into the monitoring room, all moving with practiced precision. Wright stood at the console, staring at the display. The object's appearance on the plasma screen was strange. A massive structure, a sphere at its core, 3 curved arms extending outward in an elegant, almost artistic pattern. Yet it was clearly damaged, with one of the arms entirely sheared off. "Full stop," Wright ordered. "Passive scans only. Let's take a closer look before we make any moves." The crew fell into a tense silence as the sensors continued to scan the damaged vessel. On the screen, the damaged ship grew larger as the horizon slowly circled it. Despite its damage, the ship was undeniably beautiful, its design both alien and oddly organic. The silence in the room was interrupted by Lily Cooper, the communications officer. "The distress signal, it's still coming from inside the vessel, but it's weakening," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "Whatever power source they used, it's failing fast." Wright nodded, turning to face his crew. "Prepare the boarding party. We don't know what we'll find on that ship, but we're going in. It's a first contact situation. Everyone knows their roles." Carrie, who had been silent up until that moment, felt a rush of conflicting emotions: fear, excitement, and something deeper she couldn't name. As they prepared for the mission, she glanced at the ship's viewports, watching the alien vessel grow larger on the screen. This wasn't just another routine task. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been. What lay ahead could change everything. "We've been called," Carrie muttered to herself, her hand reaching for the suit she'd need for the upcoming mission. And as the Horizon's crew moved into action, they all knew one thing for certain. They were about to enter the unknown. The Horizon drifted closer to the Lumina, the alien vessel now clearly visible on the forward display. It was both beautiful and haunting. A massive spherical core with 3 spiraling arms extending outward like the delicate tendrils of an otherworldly plant, frozen in space. Despite its alien elegance, the ship bore the scars of age and damage. One arm was sheared off entirely, the remaining 2 badly damaged, with sections of the hull punctured and exposed to the cold void. The once pristine surface was now marred by years of neglect. Even from this distance, it was clear that the Lumina had suffered an energy discharge of some kind, perhaps a solar flare or even weapons fire. Carrie Novak stood at the console, her fingers poised over the laser plasma display. Every system in the Horizon was connected, but the signals from the alien ship were intermittent and erratic. The ship had been drifting for decades, and its power systems were clearly failing. "Distance is closing," Frank Martinez, the ship's chief engineer, said, his voice low but urgent. "We should be within visual range shortly. Sensors are struggling to get a solid lock on their power readings." "Let's go with passive scans for now," Captain Wright ordered. He was standing behind Carrie, peering at the faint outlines of the alien ship, his expression unreadable. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." "Understood, Captain," Carrie responded, tapping a few controls. The ship's scanners hummed softly as they switched to passive mode. The long-range data didn't seem to improve, but she focused on the most immediate concern. "There's something unusual about their technology, Captain," she said. "It's not like anything we've seen before." Wright nodded but didn't say anything, his focus now entirely on the damaged vessel. The crew knew what this could mean. A first contact scenario, one of the greatest and most dangerous possibilities a human crew could face. Yet no one spoke aloud about the risks. It wasn't necessary. Every single person aboard knew how fragile the situation was. The Horizon eased into position, reducing speed to avoid colliding with debris from the alien ship. The image of the Lumina began to fill the forward screens as they closed the final distance. "Full stop," Wright commanded. "Let's assess this from a safe distance." The ship halted, and the crew was left to stare at the ominous alien vessel, The bridge fell silent for a moment, each person absorbed in the task at hand, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down. The only sound now was the quiet beep of the ship's consoles. "Lily, are you picking up any active transmissions from their ship?" Wright asked, his voice calm but with an underlying urgency. Lily Cooper, the communications specialist, tapped a few buttons on her console. "Nothing except that distress signal. It's faint, almost gone, but it's definitely coming from inside their hull." Carrie focused on her own screen. "The signal has degraded over time, but it's still consistent. Whatever happened to them, it's been going on for a long time." She hesitated, tapping the console to enhance the signal. "If they sent this distress call, they're in serious trouble." Pause. Then Wright's voice broke the silence. "Prepare a boarding party. Let's get this moving. We don't know what kind of technology we're dealing with, but we need to be ready for anything." Frank looked over at him, his expression hard to read. "We may not be able to make contact at all. Their tech is so far beyond us that I'm not sure how to even begin interfacing with it." "We'll make it work," Wright responded firmly. "We need to know who or what is out there." His gaze shifted briefly to the main display. "Carrie, I want you leading the science team on this. Make sure we're prepared for whatever we find." Carrie nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. As she gathered her thoughts and prepared to suit up, she couldn't help but feel the sharp thrill of what was to come. To discover a completely alien culture, even one in such dire circumstances. There were no words for it. Yet at the same time, fear gnawed at her, and she couldn't dismiss the thought that they might be walking into something far more dangerous than they realized. The shuttle bay bustled with activity as the boarding team assembled, readying themselves for the unknown. Frank was already checking the shuttle's systems, making sure everything was functional for the journey. Lily, holding the communications gear, exchanged a glance with Carrie. "Do you think we'll make contact with them, Carrie?" she asked softly, a flicker of worry in her voice. "We're going to try," Carrie answered, her tone steady but uncertain. Susan Miller, the ship's engineer, stepped forward, a thick coat of sweat on her brow. "The alien ship's power systems are completely different from ours," she said, her voice tinged with awe and frustration. "But there's a faint signal. I think we can make it to their airlock if we use the emergency thrusters to adjust our trajectory." "Good," Wright said, his voice focused. "I want the shuttle ready to go in 5 minutes. Full environmental suits, quarantine protocols in place. This is not just an exploration mission. It's a rescue. A first contact and potentially a dangerous one." The crew moved with urgency, prepping equipment, checking their suits, and ensuring every piece of gear was properly secured. Carrie took a deep breath before checking her environmental suit for the 3rd time, making sure every seal was in place. Her heart was racing, a combination of nerves and anticipation. This was the moment she'd dreamed of, yet it felt like a trap. A path she wasn't sure they could return from. The shuttle doors opened, and Carrie felt a chill crawl up her spine. The cold, empty expanse of the alien ship loomed in front of them, waiting to be explored. As the shuttle detached from the horizon, it moved with calculated precision, heading toward the lumina. The closer they got, the more details emerged. Massive gashes and jagged edges that marred the ship's otherwise graceful shape. It looked like a work of art, now shattered and broken, drifting aimlessly through space. No signs of propulsion, no crew. It was a ghost ship. The shuttle circled the alien vessel, looking for a place to dock. After what seemed like hours of scanning, Susan spoke up. "There's a docking area up ahead. It looks like it was made for smaller ships, but the airlock system is damaged. We can get it working if we're careful." "We'll do it," Carrie replied. "Let's make sure we do this right." The shuttle gently pressed against the alien ship, the docking mechanism extending to meet its counterpart. There was a brief moment of silence before a hissing sound filled the shuttle. Susan had activated the system manually, overriding the damaged parts. A faint light blinked on the console, indicating a secure connection. "Atmosphere readings show traces of oxygen," Carrie said, her voice calm but betraying her excitement. "It's breathable, but it's low. We'll need our suits." The crew stepped out onto the darkened hull of the alien vessel. the gravitation system barely functioning. As they moved through the corridors, the space around them was utterly alien. The walls were curved, with no sharp angles, and faint blue-green lights flickered from the walls, offering just enough illumination to guide them. "This ship, it's so different from anything we've seen," Carrie said, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't help but marvel at the elegant, spiral architecture that was nothing like the rigid, functional design of human ships. "I wonder if these curves serve some kind of practical purpose." They moved deeper into the ship, following the readings that led them toward the source of the remaining power. It was strange, almost as though the ship itself was alive, its architecture shifting and changing subtly as they walked through its darkened corridors. After a long trek through the ship's maze-like hallways, the team finally arrived at what appeared to be the heart of the ship. Carrie's scanner pinged sharply, indicating a source of life. There, in the center of the room, was a large stasis pod. It was frosted over, the surface opaque, but the faint glow emanating from within suggested something, or someone, was inside. "This is it," Carrie said, her voice almost a reverent whisper. "We found a survivor." Her heart pounded as she stared at the alien life form inside the pod, its shape shifting beneath the ice, its form unlike anything she had ever seen. They had just made contact, but the mystery of what lay within the pod was only beginning. The stasis pod hissed as the emergency release system activated, and the frost began to melt away. The crew of the Horizon stood around it, holding their breath. Carrie Novak was the first to step forward, watching as the icy shell around the alien being slowly receded. The light from the pod's internal mechanisms flickered erratically, casting strange shadows across the room. In the dim glow, the form within began to stir. A slender humanoid figure, its skin shimmering with iridescent colors, gradually became visible. "Is it alive?" Frank Martinez asked, his voice low as he took a step closer. Carrie didn't answer immediately. She was too transfixed by the alien's slow, deliberate movements, the faint ripples of color shifting across its skin as though it was communicating with its own biology. "It's still alive," she confirmed. "Just barely." Zakara's eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing deep purple eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. The crew's breath collectively caught. She was beautiful in a way they hadn't expected, her form delicate, yet powerful. The alien's gaze swept over them, intense, wary. "Can you hear me?" Kari asked softly, her voice measured but laced with urgency. She instinctively reached out, but her hand hovered just above the pod. Zakara's gaze flickered from Carrie's face to the others in the room, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a strange, melodic series of sounds escaped her lips, the rhythm flowing like music. The alien's skin shifted through a series of colors, subtle and fast, in response to her own disorientation. Carrie leaned closer, her hands moving swiftly over the interface. "Penny, can we translate that?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. The AI's calm voice filled the room. Linguistic analysis initiated. Signal patterns consistent with an unknown language. Initial translation matrix is active. Zakara's voice filled the room again, the sounds musical but impossible to comprehend. She shook her head, eyes still wide with confusion, clearly struggling with the situation. Her breathing was rapid, as though she were trying to understand what was happening. Frank and Susan, meanwhile, had begun working on stabilizing the pod systems, attempting to reinforce what was left of its deteriorating structure. Frank glanced over at Carrie and the others, his face set with determination. "We've got to get her stabilized before we lose her entirely," he muttered, focusing on the alien's life support systems. The pod was failing, and he knew they didn't have much time before the delicate balance of life-sustaining energy finally slipped away. The ship's alarms sounded briefly, signaling another crisis. The Lumina was still drifting, and its engines were only partially functional, a desperate relic of the ship's former glory. "Carrie, we need to get these systems under control," Wright called from across the room. "Do we have any chance of stabilizing the core systems?" Carrie looked back at him, then at the display that showed the flickering energy readings. It's going to be tough. Their power systems aren't like anything we've ever seen. The technology's too advanced, but it's deteriorating. Whatever happened to this ship? It was bad. Zakara's eyes shifted, her expression still a mix of confusion and distrust. She was taking in every movement, every gesture, processing the humans around her with an intensity that felt almost physical. I don't understand. Zakara's voice finally broke through the translator, her words heavily accented and distorted but clear enough for Carrie to understand. Why do you help me? Carrie was taken aback. It was the first clear sentence the alien had spoken, and it carried weight. The weight of deep suspicion of a creature who had been left to die by those it had once trusted. She knew there was a gulf between them, a chasm that wouldn't be easily crossed. We're here to help, Carrie said, her tone steady but not without emotion. We found you. You were in trouble. That's why we're helping. Zakara's gaze flickered to the rest of the crew, and her expression shifted. You're not supposed to help. No one is supposed to help. Carrie frowned, sensing the underlying tension. What do you mean? Zakara's skin darkened to a deep, muted blue, and the translator's voice returned with more urgency. The Vorex do not waste resources. The collective does not interfere. There is no reason to help when the benefit is too small. You broke protocol. Zakara's voice shook slightly, her hands trembling at her sides. You do not understand. You are too impulsive. The words hung in the air, charged with meaning. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The alien's view on rescue, and life in general, was chilling, and the philosophical conflict was clear. Zakara, we don't see it that way, Carrie said carefully, her voice full of empathy. We don't help because it benefits us. We help because it's the right thing to do. No one should be abandoned. Zakara's eyes narrowed, her expression skeptical. This is not your place. You are not the collective. Carrie struggled to find the right words. We're not trying to replace what you've lost. But you matter to us. Life matters. It's not about gain. It's about doing what's right. Zakara said nothing at first, but the colors on her skin shifted again, this time to a soft violet. It wasn't quite agreement, but it was something different. Curiosity, perhaps. Her eyes seemed to soften, but her body remained tense. I was left behind, she said after a long pause. For 32 cycles I waited. No one came. Many ships passed. They knew, and they kept moving. It is the way of the collective. Carrie took a deep breath, her heart heavy. I can't imagine what that must have been like, she murmured. But not everyone is like that. We're here now, and we'll help you. The alien shifted slightly in the pod, the energy reserves from the ship failing again. Carrie turned to Frank. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe less, Frank said, his face grim. We need to act now if we want to stabilize her and avoid a full system collapse. The crew set to work again, but the conversation with Zakara lingered in Carrie's mind. The idea that a species, any species, could turn a blind eye to the suffering of another was foreign to her. The contrast between Zakara's harsh, utilitarian worldview and humanity's more compassionate approach was stark. Zakara had lived in a universe where efficiency reigned supreme, where saving a life wasn't considered worth the resources it would consume. But here, on the Lumina, in the company of the Horizon crew, she was learning that compassion wasn't an impractical luxury, it was a necessity. As the work continued, Carrie kept her focus on Zakara, watching for any change, any shift in her demeanor. The alien was more than just a survivor. She was a symbol of the cold, efficient universe that humanity had never fully understood. Yet as they worked together, the lines between the two cultures began to blur. Carrie took a deep breath. She would prove to Zakara, and to the universe, that compassion was worth the cost. The tension aboard the Horizon had steadily risen since the crew's first encounter with Zakara. As the days passed, the initial fascination with the alien technology began to fade, replaced by the realization that they were facing challenges beyond their expectations. They had no idea what had happened to the Lumina, but Zakara's insights into the Vorex species' worldview were unsettling. Zakara sat in the ship's small conference room, her skin shifting with soft blues and deep purples. She looked at each of the crew members who sat opposite her, eyes narrowed with distrust. She had been an enigma from the moment she had opened her eyes, but now, the crew was learning just how different she was. "The Vorex do not interfere," Zakara said, her voice steady, her eyes scanning the faces around the table. "When resources are scarce, the collective prioritizes the survival of the many, not the few. Those who cannot help themselves are left behind." Her hands rested lightly on the table, her fingers twitching as her skin fluctuated between the cooler colors of melancholy and the warm hues of reflection. Carrie was the first to speak, her voice soft but firm. "But why? How can you just leave someone to die, knowing they might still be alive?" Zakara's eyes flickered to Carrie's face, and for a moment it seemed like a glimmer of emotion stirred in her. "The collective is built on efficiency. We cannot waste resources on the lost. To help a single life might mean the death of many. The Lumina was beyond saving when we lost contact. Sending a ship to retrieve it would have meant resources better spent elsewhere. The law of the collective is clear." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. It was a difficult concept to grasp, one that ran counter to everything they had been taught. Captain Wright broke the silence, his voice tense. "You're telling me that the Vorex would abandon their own without hesitation? That's cold." Zakara's skin shifted to a light, almost translucent shade of violet. "Cold, yes, but efficient. Our survival depends on these decisions." The room felt smaller now, the air thick with philosophical dissonance. Zakara's logic was foreign to them, unsettling. They had risked everything to respond to the Lumina's distress call. Yet to the Vorex, this was a waste of valuable time and resources. The idea that lives could be considered expendable in the name of efficiency was difficult for the crew to accept. As the conversation continued, it became clear that the philosophical gulf between Zakara and the crew of the Horizon was not something that could be easily bridged. The conflict between compassion and cold calculation was beginning to gnaw at the unity of the crew. They had saved Zakara, but at what cost? Later that day, Frank Martinez gathered the team in engineering, the weight of their task growing heavier with each passing hour. "I've made some headway with their power core," he said, his voice low with frustration. "But I can't make any promises. The systems are failing faster than we anticipated. If we don't stabilize them soon, this ship's going to drift into the next sector with no way of stopping it." Captain Wright stood by the viewport, watching the Lumina drift silently in space. He glanced over at Frank, the weight of leadership settling heavily on his shoulders. "Do what you can. We need this ship working, and we need Zakara's ship ready to move. We're already too far off course, and, if we're not careful, we might be stuck out here." The sense of urgency was palpable as the crews scrambled to analyze every available system. As Zakara's people had warned, the technology they faced was vastly different from anything they had ever encountered. Even the most basic repairs were proving difficult, the alien materials resisting every attempt to understand their makeup. Then, the first signs of sabotage appeared. A loud, sharp alarm blared through the ship, sending the crew into immediate action. "What the hell is happening?" Frank barked as he scanned the diagnostic screens in front of him. "It's the power coupling," Susan Miller, the engineer, called from across the room. "It's failing, but it's not just wear and tear. Someone, or something, has been tampering with the systems." Carrie, standing by the main console, narrowed her eyes at the readouts. "This isn't just a malfunction," she said. "There's been interference. Someone is sabotaging the ship." The crew scrambled into action, each member trying to trace the problem. But the deeper they dug, the more questions arose. Who could have done this? Was it sabotage from within, or had they attracted unwanted attention from outside the Lumina? Carrie's mind raced as she thought about the alien vessel they had boarded. It seemed too quiet now, almost too still. The air was thick with an unspoken anxiety. They had not been alone on this mission from the start. Someone had been watching them. Zakara's quiet gaze from across the room suddenly seemed less like the aloof stare of an alien and more like that of someone who knew something the humans didn't. "Captain, we need to stop this," Frank said, his voice tight with urgency. "This isn't just a mechanical failure. Someone is trying to prevent us from finishing the repairs." Wright turned sharply, his expression dark. "Keep looking. We need to find out who's behind this before it's too late." In the meantime, Zakara remained oddly distant, her posture rigid, her skin flickering with subtle hints of distrust. The tension in the air was unmistakable. Was she involved? Could she be manipulating the situation to suit her own agenda? Her people's detachment from the survival of others had set her apart from the crew's emotional investment. Could the sabotage be part of a larger plan? Or was it simply the result of a fractured shipboard system? Zakara watched the humans as they worked, her eyes following their movements with a careful, almost calculating intensity. She said nothing, but remained steadfast in her position, her skin shifting in response to her thoughts. Hours later, as the team worked frantically to stabilize the ship, the sabotage escalated. Another system, this time the life support, malfunctioned. The temperature on the Lumina dropped rapidly, and the crew was forced to don emergency gear just to stay functional. They had not anticipated this level of interference. "Someone's playing a dangerous game with us," Wright muttered under his breath. But who? As tensions continued to rise, Carrie found herself caught between suspicion and uncertainty. Zakara had made it clear that the Vorax did not value life the way humans did. Perhaps, Carrie thought, this was a test, one of trust. But that did not explain the sabotage. "I need to know if you're involved, Zakara," Carrie said, approaching the alien, her voice firm but quiet. "If you're trying to sabotage us, this ends now." Zakara's eyes locked onto Carrie's, her skin darkening to a shade of deep blue. Her lips parted, but the words that followed were not defensive. Instead, they were calm. "We are not alone," Zakara said softly, her voice resonating with a strange certainty. "Someone else is here, watching, and they will not let you succeed." Carrie felt a chill race down her spine as the implications of Zakara's words began to settle in. The Lumina wasn't just an abandoned ship. They had unknowingly stepped into a larger game, one far more dangerous than they had realized. And now, the crew's trust was about to be tested in ways they could never have anticipated. The Horizon crew wasn't just dealing with a malfunction. They were facing something far darker. An unseen threat that was closing in from all sides. The Lumina shuddered violently as the secondary power core exploded. The deafening blast sent shockwaves through the ship, causing sparks to fly from several panels in the engineering bay. The crew scrambled to their feet, eyes wide in disbelief as the once stable system suddenly went into a complete state of chaos. Smoke billowed from ruptured conduits, filling the narrow corridors with a burning scent as alarms screamed in the background. "What the hell happened?" Frank Martinez shouted over the noise, his voice strained with frustration as he tried to stabilize the ship's remaining systems. "Sabotage," Carrie said, her voice tight as she read the readings flashing on her heads-up display. "There's no other explanation." The Lumina was quickly descending into chaos. Power fluctuations, system failures, and erratic life support readings filled every console. As the crew scrambled to regain control, Captain Wright's voice crackled over the comms. "Report now!" "We've lost critical systems," Frank barked back. "The core breach was no accident. Someone has been tampering with our systems from the inside." The realization hit Carrie like a physical blow. They weren't alone. They had been watched, manipulated. "What about the crew? Any life signs?" Wright demanded. Carrie's fingers flew across the control panel as she tapped into the ship's diagnostic systems. "There are faint life signs, but it's hard to get a clear read. The damage is affecting everything. I don't trust these readings." "Get the core stabilized," Wright ordered, his voice a mix of command and concern. "We need to stop this from spreading. Move!" Carrie moved quickly, following Frank into the heart of the ship's power core, where the damage was most severe. The deep hum of failing systems reverberated through the walls, and thick cables sparked above their heads as they worked in a haze of smoke and falling debris. Despite their best efforts, the damage seemed to multiply by the second. "There's something wrong," Frank muttered, as he recalibrated the stabilizer to no effect. "I'm getting readings from places I shouldn't even be able to access. It's like someone's messing with the ship's system remotely." "Do you think this is sabotage?" Carrie asked, her words laced with suspicion. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something much bigger than just a power malfunction. "I don't know, but I'm starting to believe someone else is on board. Someone who doesn't want us to fix this ship," Frank replied, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked the system with increasing urgency. Just as he finished reconfiguring a broken connection, a sudden tremor shook the entire ship, sending Carrie stumbling to the side. The power surge was immediate and violent, like a current of electricity running through the ship's very veins. She felt her pulse race. "Captain, we need to pull out of here," Carrie said, panic creeping into her voice. "We're losing control." Wright's response was swift. "Abort all repair efforts. Get to the bridge. We're pulling the crew out of the Lumina now." As the crew scrambled to follow orders, Carrie's mind was racing. The situation had gone from a potential first contact mission to a deadly game of survival. The Lumina was clearly sabotaged, and the threat was no longer just a matter of mechanical failure. Something, or someone, was actively working to ensure that they couldn't succeed. The shuttle bay was alive with activity as the crew prepared to abandon ship. Zakara stood near the entrance, watching the chaos unfold with an unreadable expression. Carrie hesitated as she caught sight of the alien. "Zakara, what's going on here?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Were you involved in this?" Zakara's skin shifted to a dark green, signaling irritation, or perhaps unease. "I told you," she said softly, "you are not alone out here. The Vorax do not wish for you to succeed. You have interfered with things far beyond your understanding." Carrie felt a chill wash over her. You knew what would happen, and you didn't warn us." Zakara didn't flinch. "You were foolish to believe that your actions would go unnoticed. The collective does not forgive such intrusions." Her voice was cold, almost indifferent, as if the human lives at stake meant little to her. Carrie took a step back, disbelief flashing in her eyes. "You let this happen. You knew what the risks were, and you didn't say a word?" Zakara's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You were too eager. You wanted to save what was lost. The Vorax do not make such mistakes. There is a purpose to everything." "Your purpose almost killed us," Frank shouted, his face flushed with anger. "You've been leading us into a trap this entire time." The tension in the shuttle bay grew thick, and the crew stood on edge, unsure of what to believe. Zakara's silence only made the situation worse. "We don't have time for this," Wright barked, his voice firm as he made his way toward the exit. "Move! We're getting off this ship before we're all dead." As the crew hurried to leave, Carrie's mind whirled with confusion and anger. Zakara had known. She had known the Lumina wasn't a simple rescue mission, yet she hadn't told them the truth. The alien had played them, using their compassion against them. As they reached the shuttle bay and boarded the shuttle for the horizon, the reality of their situation began to set in. The Lumina was no longer just a ship. They were trapped in a game, and they were the unwitting players. But as the shuttle doors closed, Carrie noticed something on the monitors in the corner of her vision. A faint flicker, barely noticeable. A signal. An incoming transmission from deep space. She studied it for a moment before her eyes widened. The signal wasn't from the Lumina. It was coming from somewhere else. A ship, unseen, yet close. "We're being watched," she whispered, her voice full of dread. Wright turned to her, his face grim. "Prepare the crew for whatever's coming. We may have just triggered something much worse." As the shuttle detached from the Lumina and set course for the horizon, the crew was left to grapple with the knowledge that they had walked into a much larger conflict, one that was only beginning to unfold. The Vorax would soon make their move, and when they did, the crew of the horizon would need to be ready. But how could they prepare for an enemy they had yet to truly understand? And more importantly, how much of their fate was already sealed? The warning lights on the horizon flickered once again, the sound of their constant blinking like a ticking clock. The ship was on high alert, its crew assembled at the tactical station in a tense silence. The crew had barely begun to recover from the chaos of the luminous sabotage when the real threat finally materialized. "Incoming!" Lily Cooper's voice rang out over the comms, her eyes glued to the plasma display. "Multiple ships detected. They're coming in fast." Carrie turned toward her, her body rigid. "What do we know about them?" Lily's fingers danced across her console. "They're not Vorex. I'm not sure who they are yet, but they've locked onto us." "Is Zakara still in the safe zone?" Captain Wright asked sharply, his focus unwavering. "We've got her contained in the lower decks, sir," Frank responded, adjusting his station. "But this is escalating fast." The tension was palpable now, the air thick with anticipation as the crew worked quickly, the sudden realization that they were no longer in control sinking in. "They're here," Lily said as the scanners showed enemy ships descending from the dark, their weapons already primed. "At least 4 of them." Wright's face hardened. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Get everyone to battle stations. This is not a drill." Harry's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment the horizon would either survive or become another casualty of deep space. The enemy ships loomed larger on the radar, their designs unfamiliar, sleek and aggressive. It was clear they weren't here for a diplomatic discussion. The Lumina was the prize, and they were the unwitting targets. Wright leaned into the comm system, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is Captain Wright of the Horizon. We are a neutral vessel. Stand down immediately." The transmission was met with nothing but static, a clear signal that negotiations were not on the table. "Shields up," Frank ordered. "We're going to need every ounce of power we can get. Engaging evasive systems now." The crew braced themselves as the horizon lurched to one side, barely avoiding a barrage of plasma rounds fired by the enemy ships. The shock wave rattled the ship, but the horizon held its course. "Fire back!" Wright's voice was a command that left no room for doubt. "All weapons, target their lead ship." The ship trembled as the horizon's own weapons systems powered up, the targeting system locking in on the nearest enemy vessel. The crew's nerves were on edge as the first round of laser fire screamed across the vast void, striking the enemy ship's shields. The alien ship responded in kind, a sudden burst of energy impacting the horizon's aft. "Shields at 65%, Frank announced, his voice tense as he scrambled to adjust the defense systems. "We can't take many more hits like that." "We're not going to let them overwhelm us," Captain Wright said, gripping the edge of his console. "Evasive maneuvers, full speed ahead." Carrie could hear the sound of her pulse in her ears as the ship bucked and swayed beneath them. The enemy's weapons were deadly accurate, their ship movements swift and precise. But the horizon was agile. Despite the damage, it was built to withstand and adapt. "We're approaching their flanks," Frank called. "They're trying to box us in." Lily's voice rang out once again. "We've got another wave incoming, more ships. These are bigger, better armed. They're not backing off." Carrie felt a pang of realization. Whoever these enemies were, they were not just here for the Lumina. They wanted the horizon, too. The tactical situation was worsening, and the crew was growing desperate. The enemy had numerical superiority, but the horizon's maneuverability was its advantage. Wright was in full command now, his face set in grim determination as he continued to direct the ship's movements. But time was slipping away. "They're locking onto our propulsion systems," Frank said, his voice strained. "We need to counter their targeting systems." Carrie quickly tapped into the comms system. "Zakara, do you have any insights on the technology of these ships? Any weaknesses we can exploit?" There was a long pause before Zakara responded, her voice cold and distant. "You are on your own. I have no data on their tactics or their technology." Carrie bit her lip in frustration. "We didn't sign up for this, Zakara. You knew we weren't prepared for this kind of threat." "You underestimate them," Zakara replied flatly. "The Vorex do not operate on sentiment. Carrie's hands tightened on the console, but there was no time for further words. The enemy ships were closing in, and the horizon was under siege. Frank's voice broke through the tension. "We've got a direct hit on our engines. Power's fluctuating." "Hold steady," Wright ordered, his voice calm despite the rising chaos. "Get us out of here, Frank. I need more time." The horizon rocketed forward, narrowly avoiding another barrage of plasma fire. The air in the cockpit was thick with tension as the crew fought to regain control of their fate. "Captain," Frank called urgently, "I've got an idea. If I can reroute the power to our port side and increase the pressure in the auxiliary engines, we can do a short-range warp jump. Enough to throw them off our trail, at least temporarily." Wright nodded quickly. "Do it. We don't have a choice." As Frank worked furiously to reroute the systems, Carrie watched with bated breath. The Horizon's engines surged in response, and the ship shot forward, its trajectory unpredictable. The enemy ships followed, closing in as the distance between them shrank to a dangerous level. The crew felt the jolt as the ship's engines shifted. Carrie's stomach dropped as the ship's body seemed to bend under the pressure. They were pushing the limits of the ship's systems, but Frank's plan had worked. Just barely. With a sharp, unnatural lurch, the Horizon blinked out of existence and reappeared several kilometers away, temporarily out of range. The crew exhaled in relief, but the victory was fleeting. "They've adapted," Frank said grimly, staring at his screen. "We're not safe. Not yet." Carrie's heart raced. "What are they waiting for?" "They're coordinating," Wright said, eyes fixed on the viewport. "This isn't just a battle. It's a strategy. They're trying to force us into a position we can't escape." The crew had no time to process the full scope of the threat before the next round of fire hit. The battle had only just begun. The aftermath of the battle had left the horizon scarred but intact. The emergency lighting flickered intermittently as the crew worked in shifts, assessing the damage to the ship. Frank Martinez, his face streaked with sweat and grime, stood over a pile of debris, cursing under his breath as he attempted to salvage the most vital systems. Carrie, leaning against a console, watched the crew members work, her thoughts elsewhere, tangled in the consequences of their action. Captain Wright stood by the viewport, staring out into the black void of space, the battle now distant, but still very much present in his mind. He had led them into this war. He had chosen to engage, to protect Zakara and her people. But the cost was becoming clear. It wasn't just the physical toll of the battle, it was the emotional one too. "Captain," Frank's voice broke the silence. "We've got most of the major systems back online, but it's going to take more than a few hours to patch up the rest. We're running low on supplies, and morale is strained." Wright sighed deeply, his hands clenched at his sides. "I know, Frank, but we don't have a choice. We're not going to leave Zakara stranded here, not after everything that's happened." Carrie stepped forward, her voice quieter than usual. "Captain, we need to talk. About what we've done. What we've gotten ourselves into." Wright turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I know. It's not what we expected, but what choice did we have?" Before Carrie could respond, the comms system crackled to life and the sharp voice of Lily Cooper echoed across the room. "Captain, you're going to want to see this." Wright's brow furrowed as he moved toward the console. A new message had appeared on the plasma display, a transmission from the Vorex. His eyes narrowed as he read the incoming message. It was an official request for a meeting. An emissary from the Vorex sent to discuss the aftermath of the attack and the actions of the Horizon. Wright knew this was coming, but the timing couldn't have been worse. "Patch it through," he ordered. A moment later, the image of a Vorex official appeared on the screen. The being's skin shimmered with the usual undulating patterns, but there was no warmth in its expression. The Vorex emissary's eyes were cold, calculating, devoid of any empathy. "I am Administrator Kyle of the Vorex Collective," the Vorex said in a tone that carried an air of superiority. "You have made a grave mistake. Your interference with the Lumina was ill-advised. The Vorex do not tolerate disruption of our plans. You will now face the consequences of your actions." Wright's gaze hardened. "We did what any other species would have done in our position. We helped a being in need. Edo's expression barely flickered. The Vorex do not concern themselves with the welfare of individuals. We act in the interest of the collective, for the survival of our people. You are an insignificant species, with your unpredictable decisions and emotional impulses. You have already proven that you are incapable of understanding the true nature of galactic order. The coldness of the Vorex's words hit Wright like a blow, but he stood his ground. We don't need to understand your order. We operate on compassion, not calculation. We make decisions based on what's right, not what's efficient. The Vorex emissary's gaze hardened. Your actions have consequences, Captain Wright. The Vorex do not tolerate interference in our affairs. You will be held accountable. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in a heavy silence. Wright clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. We're being forced into a corner, Carrie said, her voice low. They'll never accept our methods, not when their entire philosophy is built on efficiency. Frank crossed his arms, frustration evident on his face. And we're supposed to just roll over and let them do what they want? We didn't ask for this fight, but we're not going to let them push us around either. We're not going to back down, Wright said, his voice firm, though the strain of the situation was visible in his eyes. But we need to be smart. We need to prepare for what's coming. The crew went silent, each person lost in their thoughts. Zakara had become a symbol of the conflict, a representative of the Vorex philosophy that clashed violently with the crew's values. Zakara had been the catalyst for everything, the reason they had entered this war. But now, as the situation escalated, the true cost of their decision to help her began to surface. In the days that followed, the crew worked tirelessly to fortify the horizon, preparing for the impending confrontation with the Vorex. Every moment was spent analyzing data, strategizing, and reinforcing the ship's defenses. But there was no escaping the emotional toll the situation had taken. Zakara spent more time in her quarters, speaking little to the crew. She had retreated into herself, perhaps struggling with her own feelings about the consequences of the Horizon's intervention. Carrie couldn't help but wonder what Zakara thought about the escalating conflict. Had she known this was inevitable? Had she been complicit in setting the stage for war? One evening, Carrie found herself standing outside Zakara's quarters, unsure whether to enter. Finally, she tapped the door chime. When it slid open, Zakara stood inside, her skin a muted shade of gray, her posture rigid as she looked at Carrie. I wanted to talk, Carrie said softly. Zakara nodded, but didn't speak. The silence was thick, heavy with unspoken words. What are you thinking? Carrie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. About all of this. About what's coming. Zakara's eyes flickered, the colors shifting in slow patterns. You are an interesting species, Carrie Novak. You make decisions without calculation. You risk everything for what you believe is right. It is both frustrating and admirable. Carrie's eyes softened. But you don't understand it, do you? You can't. You come from a place where efficiency is everything. You're taught that survival is all that matters. But we, humans, we're different. We don't just survive. We live. We feel. We fight for each other. Zakara's gaze softened, though her skin remained unchanged. I am beginning to see that. Perhaps you are not as weak as I once believed. Carrie smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. It's not about strength. It's about what we're willing to sacrifice. And we're all going to have to sacrifice something before this is over. Zakara's gaze flickered with something like understanding, though her emotions were still unreadable. Then we will see what that cost is. As the crew prepared for the inevitable clash with the Vorex, the weight of their decisions bore down on them. The looming conflict was no longer just a matter of war tactics. It was a test of everything they stood for, everything that made them human. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but the crew of the Horizon had already made their choice. And now, they had to live with the consequences. Now. Captain Wright muttered, his eyes flicking over the heads-up display as the Vorex ships loomed larger on the view screen. His hand was steady on the command console, but beneath the calm his mind raced, running through every tactical possibility. The crew of the Horizon had no more time for second guesses. The Vorex fleet had arrived. "We've got no time to wait," Wright snapped, his voice sharp as it cut through the tense silence in the bridge. "Prepare for full engagement. All hands, this is it. This is our fight." Carrie's heart thudded in her chest, but her hands were steady as she maneuvered to her station. She knew what was at stake. Zakara's safety, the future of the Horizon, the survival of the crew. All of it rested on this moment. She glanced over at Frank, who was already working furiously, adjusting the defensive shields and weapon systems. "We're up against their entire fleet," Frank said grimly, his fingers flying across the control panel. "This is going to take everything we've got." "We're not backing down," Wright said. "We've fought for this long. We're going to see it through to the end." The display in front of Carrie flickered as the enemy ships appeared, their sleek forms cutting through the void, their weapons primed and ready. The Horizon felt small in comparison, but in her crew's hands, it was a weapon in its own right. "Enemy ships are locking on," Lily said, her voice cool, though her hands trembled ever so slightly. "We've got incoming fire. They're not wasting any time." The first round of laser fire streaked across the dark void, lighting up the space between them like the flash of a dying star. The Horizon swerved sharply, narrowly dodging the beam that slammed into the space where it had just been. The ship groaned as the evasive maneuver sent it careening toward the right, and Wright barked orders to maintain control. "Shields holding at 80%, adjusting angle to reduce exposure," Frank called out. "Get us closer, we need to close the gap." "Engaging evasive maneuvers," Wright ordered, his voice low and calm despite the urgency of the moment. "Lily, get us a clearer target on their lead vessel." Lily nodded, her fingers moving quickly over the console. "Lead ship locked," she reported. "But their shields are solid. We won't get a direct hit unless we weaken them first." "Focus fire on their secondary systems," Wright said. "Disable their weapons, then we take the rest." Erie's pulse raced as the ship shuddered under the strain of another impact. The Horizon wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting for Zakara's freedom and the crew's right to defend what they believed in. "Direct hit on their port side," Frank yelled. "Shields down to 40%. We're losing power to the engines. We've got to stabilize or we're going to drift." "It's not happening," Wright responded, his gaze focused on the plasma display. He pointed toward the enemy formation. "Frank, I need a full burn on the left flank. Hit 'em hard." The ship surged forward with the sudden thrust of its engines, the distant stars blurring in streaks of light as the Horizon pushed ahead, ramming into the Vorex's left flank. The enemy's response was swift, a wall of counterfire erupting from their fleet. But the Horizon had already moved into position. "We're in," Frank muttered under his breath, taking out their power grid. The Horizon's weapons unleashed a flurry of energy blasts, strategically aimed at the vulnerable points of the enemy ships. Sparks erupted across the alien vessels as their shields began to falter, their defensive systems buckling under the assault. But the Vorex didn't yield easily. They fought with cold, calculated precision, responding to every movement of the Horizon with perfect coordination. "They're not letting up," Carrie said, her voice tense. "This is only the first wave. We need to act fast." Wright's lips tightened. "We will. Frank, reroute power to the secondary turrets. We need to punch through their main defense grid." "I'm already on it," Frank replied, fingers flying across the panel. For the next few minutes, the crew fought tooth and nail against the Vorex. Every second was a high-stakes gamble, as the ship rocked and reeled under the intensity of the battle. Explosions erupted across the viewscreen, signaling the destruction of one Vorex ship after another. But for every ship they downed, two more seemed to take its place. "Captain," Frank said, his voice suddenly urgent, "there's a breach in the aft engine compartment. If we don't seal it, the ship's going to collapse on itself." "Seal it now," Wright ordered, his focus unwavering. "We don't have the luxury of time." "Done," Frank reported shortly. "But we need to finish this, or we won't be able to hold out much longer." Carrie gripped her seat as the ship lurched again, another explosion shaking the very walls of the Horizon. She could feel the weight of the moment in every fiber of her being. There was no turning back now. This was their final stand. Lily, Wright barked. Target their weapons systems. We've got to neutralize them before they regroup. The enemy ships were relentless, their cold efficiency working against the crew at every turn. But despite the overwhelming odds, despite the endless barrage of fire and the damage they were taking, Wright's determination never wavered. We can't let them win, he muttered to himself. Not like this. We're getting close, Frank said. One more push. With a final surge of energy, the horizon tore through the enemy defenses, breaking through their line with devastating force. The Vorax ships scattered in disarray, their weapons failing to coordinate as they tried to regroup. Carrie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The battle was far from over, but this first wave of attacks had ended in their favor. Yet, the crew knew that the war for the Lumina was far from won. We've made it this far, Wright said, his voice low but filled with a fierce resolve. But it's not over yet. Zakara's voice echoed from behind them, quiet yet steady. You fought well, but this is only the beginning. The Vorax will not back down. Wright turned toward her, his gaze unwavering. Neither will we. And as the stars outside the horizon streaked past, the crew steeled themselves for the battles to come. The fate of the Lumina, Zakara, and the very future of humanity depended on what they did next. And they would fight for that future with everything they had. The final showdown was just beginning. The horizon drifted slowly through the quiet aftermath, its systems humming faintly, a testament to the resilience of the crew that had fought and survived. The silence felt heavy, like the calm after a storm, unsettling in its weight. The battle was over, but the cost was apparent in every corner of the ship. Broken equipment, exhausted crew members, and lingering doubts all weighed on their shoulders, yet a sense of accomplishment, hard-won and fragile, began to seep in. Captain Wright stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars, which now seemed different, more distant, less certain. The Vorax had been forced into retreat, their fleet broken, but the victory had been expensive. The horizon had suffered, the crew had bled, and the very heart of humanity had been tested in ways they hadn't imagined when they first answered the distress call. The door slid open, and Carrie Novak stepped into the room, her movements slow, deliberate. She had been by Zakara's side through the entire ordeal, and now, in the quiet after the chaos, she carried with her the weight of the journey. "Captain," she began, her voice soft. "I've been talking to Zakara. She's ready to return to her people." Wright nodded, his face a mask of tired resolve. "Good. We've done what we set out to do. We gave her a chance no one else would." Carrie looked over at the ship's control panels, where the rest of the crew was still working. Frank was monitoring the last of the repairs, while Lily and Susan were securing the ship's defensive protocols. There was a finality in their movements now, a sense of closure, but there was also an underlying tension. The journey wasn't over. Not yet. "How do you feel about it?" Carrie asked, the question lingering in the air between them. Wright's gaze never left the stars. "We won, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more ahead for us. The galaxy isn't going to forget what happened here." Carrie's eyes softened and she nodded, understanding the truth in his words. The legacy of the horizon and its crew would echo through the galaxy. But that didn't mean the struggle was over. The path they had chosen, compassion over efficiency, wasn't one that would be easily accepted by all. The communication console beeped, cutting through the silence. Lily's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we're receiving a signal from the Vorax. They want to speak with us." "Patch it through," Wright ordered, his voice unwavering. On the display, Administrator Kale's image flickered into view. The Vorax expression was as unreadable as ever, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor, a slight change in his stance, a faint hint of something beyond indifference. "You've won this round, humans." Kale's voice was smooth, but there was an unmistakable edge of grudging respect. "But understand this. Your methods will never be embraced by the collective. Your compassion is an anomaly, one that the galaxy cannot sustain." Wright's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. Maybe not, but it's what makes us different. We do what's right, not what's easy. Cale studied him for a moment, the silence stretching thin. Then, with a slight nod, the Vorex emissary spoke again, though the words felt more like a concession than a victory. Your actions have not gone unnoticed. The collective will record this encounter. It will shape the future of our interactions with your species. The transmission ended abruptly, and the crew fell into a heavy silence. It was clear now. The horizon had left an imprint, one that would linger long after their journey was over. Whether it was a mark of goodwill or a reminder of defiance, they had shown the galaxy something new. Zakara's voice interrupted the quiet moments later, soft but firm. Captain, I wish to speak with you. Wright turned to face the alien who had emerged from the shadows of the corridor, her skin flickering in hues of blue and green. The Vorex survivor's expression was different from when they first met. Warmer, perhaps, or at least more thoughtful. Zakara, Wright greeted, his tone a mix of weariness and respect. I'm glad to see you well. Zakara nodded, though her movements were slower than usual. I have learned much from you, Captain Wright, more than I ever anticipated. My people will know of your ways, and they will remember what you have done. I didn't do it for the Vorex, Wright said, his voice a little softer now. I did it for you. For the life we saw in you, Zakara. The alien paused, her gaze intense. And that is why you are different. You do not act out of calculation, but out of belief. Wright sighed, his shoulders slumping. It's not always easy. We've sacrificed so much, and I can't help but wonder if it was all worth it. But we couldn't turn away from you. Zakara's eyes shifted to the view outside the ship, her thoughts clearly far away. I will return to my people, but I carry with me a different understanding now. Your compassion, it is a strength, not a weakness. It is something the Vorex have forgotten. Wright's expression softened as he nodded. I'm glad you see that. Maybe one day, the galaxy will too. As Zakara turned to leave, she paused at the door, glancing back at the crew. Your legacy will not be forgotten, I promise you that. With that, she was gone, leaving the crew to reflect on what they had achieved. The Vorex may not have embraced humanity's methods, but Zakara had seen their value. In the end, that's all that mattered. The horizon set its course back toward known space, but the path ahead was uncertain. The battle was over, but humanity's place in the galaxy was still being forged. As the stars stretched out before them, Captain Wright couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The crew had proved something fundamental. Compassion could survive even in the harshest of environments. It was a gift, one that would shape the future of the galaxy, no matter the challenges they faced. And as the horizon drifted toward the unknown, there was hope, fragile but unwavering, that humanity's legacy would continue. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of, and now humanity's place in it was secure. For now, that was enough.